Meek, which I am so excited about this a conversation about so many important subjects. And the objective of those conversations is really to talk with real people who have gone through real things, so we can really learn from their own experience, which I think it's always so valuable. And today we're going to have a conversation about grief, which covers a lot of different things. But in essence, Denny has gone through one of the worst things that I believe a human being can go through in her lifetime, and she has gone through several of them. And I think that we're going to try to touch as many as we can here. And I think, we kind of talked about that grief covers, the general kind of theme, but it's really important for us to talk about the different aspects of it, the different things that she has gone through. And I really thank you so much, Denny, for being here and for sharing with us your story. Thank you so much. How are you today?
I'm good, Angelica. Thank you for having me.
So why don't you just start by telling us, in summary, I think it'll be really important for you to tell us a general overview about your story, and then we can start touching on the different aspects of grief.
Okay. So I wrote a memoir a couple of years ago called Still Standing, and it covers the major life challenges that I've faced, and that includes domestic violence in my two main relationships, the death of a baby, aged 2 months, single parenting, the development of fully blown anorexia nervosa in my daughter, and the deaths one by one of 2 of my teenagers several years apart to suicide, and a very long passage of grief. So that's what my book, Still Standing, is about. It was very hard for me to structure that book because all these subjects overlapped each other and they all were occurring at the same time. They were not simultaneous. Great, I got over that, I can get on to the next one. It didn't happen like that. It overlapped. So my second son, Joseph, beautiful baby, dark curly hair, was born with a heart abnormality, but we did not find that out until he was 8 days old. And we were transferred to Brisbane, lots of testing. And 16 hours after that testing began, we were told that he would need urgent open heart surgery before the end of that week, or he would most certainly die. There was a 30% chance that he wouldn't recover. We would not get through the surgery, but he did. And there was a huge mountain of medical milestones to help him recover from, tubes and drips and monitors and all medications. We took him home, aged 1 month, and we had a lovely time at home with him. He was given a good prognosis for a healthy, normal life, and it was not foreseen that he would get sick again, but he did start to get sick at home. I was allowed to keep him home on medication. I'd been taught how to administer it. But we ended up back in Brisbane, and they were trying to find the problem and were unable to, because it was a very rare condition he had in the first place. They hadn't seen this reaction in his heart before. So in the middle of one night, I was called up to intensive care, and he died that night. So I was 25 at that stage, and he was 2 months old, and I hadn't come face to face with death like that before. It was a terrible shock, and it's a very, very vivid night in my memory. How people deal with death is highly personal and very affected by cultural attitudes. It wasn't, I don't think it was being handled very well at the time. I had a degree in psychology, but that's up here. The heart has its own story. And it was very, very shortly after that people started, I felt pressured to get on with my life. And you got the cutting ties, letting go, being, pushed at you.
So at that time, you had one child at home,
I
and he
did.
was your second child. Yeah. And how old was your first child?
He was 18 months when Joseph was born, so my
Wow.
eldest Simon was 20 months. So that was a big ask, you know.
Yes.
Every time I'd lost a child, actually, I've had another child I had to live for. But in amongst that, overlapping that, is the domestic violence. So several days after Joseph's open heart surgery, there was an episode of violence in the motel where we were staying near the hospital. I know my husband was taking it out on me, his anxiety, his upset about the whole situation. He felt bad, you know, but that's part of the violence cycle. That's part of the difficulty in domestic violence. He showed remorse. He felt really bad, and I loved him, and I believed that change was possible, etc., etc.
So before, are you saying that something like an episode like that, it had never happened before? It was just triggered by the trauma of going through that with your baby?
No, I'm not saying that. It had happened before.
Okay, cool. Okay.
But with my husband, it was not very often.
Uh-huh.
But now and then is enough for the subject to hover. It's enough to affect the dynamics and intimidate you from being your full self and from feeling free to express everything you need to express of yourself.
Yes.
So we actually had a third child. She came along quickly. She came along 4 months after our second son died. And then I got pregnant 4 months later. And it was happy. We were relieved to be having another baby. And but you know, grief takes a real lot of work, a lot of commitment.
Yes.
And it surfaced again when we had Ali, our third child. It surfaced again, and there's just so much to process in grief, Angelica. So much.
And I think the stats of couples that lose an infant, that break up, are kind of the 80 to 90%, right? I know that one of my friends lost a baby a week old after having a heart surgery. Yes, for them they found out when she was still pregnant. And I experienced that very closely because she's a very close friend, and I got to the hospital when he had just died.
Wow.
And like you said, it wasn't my baby, but I just felt so deeply in my soul that there is no words to explain how you process that. I remember, going down the elevator with them because we had to leave the hospital after saying goodbye to him. And, it was in London, and the world hits you, as in, how do you even put one foot in front of the other after what just happened? They did not have another child at the time. And it was really, I saw it really, really, it was really hard. Like I said, it's a process. It hits you different ways. It hits the man and the woman in a different way.
Yes.
And I remember that, their commitment to staying to each other, with each other, and for each other, and being there for each other, it had to be very, very strong, because the statistics shows that, most couples, they do get divorced after that because they just can't keep going.
It's a major stress on a marriage. It's a very major stress. It's a major stress on an individual.
Yes.
Big on a marriage.
Yeah.
So my husband and I were together for 8 years altogether. I loved him very much. And we had 3 beautiful children. And we went our separate ways. I had a subsequent relationship, and the violence and the abuse in that relationship, as it turned out, was worse. It was verbal as well as physical, and the verbal abuse is insidious. It does damage that you cannot see and you cannot monitor. You think you are, because everything that you have access to about yourself, you think you are keeping handled, but it goes in very deep. And I'm still dealing with the consequences of that now.
Yeah, and again, like you said, because it's not something that you can see, the justice doesn't even recognize it, right? It's not even, in court is not something that you can, that will stand. Legislation, the whole system, it's very, very much, it's very hard to really prove that that's happening.
That's right.
Even when you are trying to protect your children from it, because how do you prove that the verbal abuse is affecting your children if it's just words?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And yeah, I came across some shocking statistics when I was researching for my book. And one of them is that children who live with domestic violence are 4 times more likely to develop a mental illness and 6 times more likely to take their own lives.
Yeah.
So that was very shocking to me. And they don't have to witness it firsthand to be affected.
Wow. Yeah. And I think they start around, what they're going to do when they grow up, around, not succeeding in life in regards to, like jobs and, all of that as well really affects them, right? Like, because it is a trauma that they are going through.
It is, yeah. We know this now. At the time for me, the law and the law's attitudes towards it was changing. They were in a state of flux. In 1985, when I was married, I phoned the police after a violent episode and I said, could you tell me about the new domestic violence court order? And the police officer said, nah, never heard of it. And I said, what do you normally do in cases of domestic violence? And he said, we don't really like to get involved in domestic disputes, love. So
wow.
I was on my own. And then 8 or 9 years later, in the next relationship, after an episode of violence, I phoned the police and spoke to a policewoman. And she said, when did this happen? And I said, 2 nights ago. She said, who did you speak to then about it? I said, no one. And she said, you mean this is the first time you've reported it? I said, yes. And she said, why? You shouldn't wait. You should report it straight away. So the law had changed in its attitude towards it. Other people have different experiences, don't they? It takes a lot.
It takes a lot of courage, and I think it's important to highlight that the percentage of domestic violence hasn't really decreased as a result of the legislation, being there and the police being there to support. The
rate of DV has increased since COVID. It used to be 1 in 4 in Australia, 1 in 4 women affected. I know men are affected as well.
Men is affected as well, but that's for sure.
I think that the economic considerations are harder for women. The rate of homelessness here in Australia has increased since COVID as well, and it affects women over 55.
Wow.
The rate of DV has risen to 1 in 3.
Wow, that's incredible,
So it's a big problem. And
it's a big problem.
The court orders help, but they don't legislate against, chauvinist attitudes that it's all right for a man to treat a woman this way, or that abuse is the way to handle problems. There was nothing that could be done about my self-esteem in the court. There's nothing.
No.
And
you have to build yourself up by yourself, right? Afterwards, if you are brave, if you have the courage enough to leave, if you kind of, if you go through the process, afterwards you're left in pieces and you have to build yourself up again by yourself, right? There is no really a lot of, support really. And it's a cycle, right? I see, if you, as a kid, you see your domestic violence in your house, then most likely also, I think shows that, the woman will be most likely to get into a relationship that would be also, based in a domestic violence relationship, and a man will be most likely to be violent again. So it is a vicious cycle that keeps going. It's a generational cycle that unless someone breaks it, it's really difficult to to really stop it altogether. But just touching a little bit on it, and I know that, you know, in one of your other interviews, you know, you were talking about, you know, those statistics, and I think the person asked you, you know, if you knew that those, you know, the statistics about how it impact your children, you know, would you have left earlier? And I think, you know, I think there is so much more to it, right? Like, I think the stats are all over the place now. Everybody knows the stats now because it's in our face every day. But what do you think it was the thing that made you leave both relationships?
The first one, my husband and I had been separated, and we decided to have another go. And I knew that would be my last try. And he knew too. We both knew that we were trying very hard. And it blew up. He pushed me, hit me. I fell against a door and, you know, scraped my arm. It was bleeding. And we just stared at each other and knew the marriage was finished. We just knew. We typically, a woman will try, I will say a woman, I'll speak on behalf of women, they leave up to 7 times, 7 or 8 times. And
yeah,
that was about my 7th or 8th try.
Yes.
And okay. I was tired of trying, and I wanted a happy home for myself and my children. I wanted a happy marriage. I didn't want violence in my marriage. I wanted to be, and I could not be there. And I sort of felt like we were living in his parents' marriage. I know he would not have wanted to live that way either. He felt bad about it as well. So I knew, he knew too. We knew it was finished. The second relationship, what made me decide to leave was that it escalated to a level that it had not before. The violence, he hit me, and very, very hard on this side of my face, and it broke my wisdom tooth, and it knocked me semi-conscious. So that it had never escalated to that level before. So I knew I wasn't going to do any more. I had got 4 lots of couples counselling for he and I. I had arranged counselling for my husband and me too. I'd like to say, Angelica, that I have a background in psychology, and I was aware, you know, in fact, I've said it in my book, Still Standing, that I didn't want my son growing up to be violent, and I didn't want my daughter to grow up expecting it. I knew these things. You cannot see. It's insidious. You cannot see.
Yeah.
And we have a culture that supports bullying, you know, in disguised ways. We're not, we don't have equality in so many different ways yet. And I think since COVID, the whole world is examining power and how it's playing out in different structures in politics, right down to personal relationships of narcissism. It's something that we're looking at, you know, and this is one way in which our culture supports power over, is through violence.
Yeah, and I think there is also a lot of shame around, like you said, you study psychology, and, you know, there is so much shame around speaking out, you know, about it and saying, you know, I am a victim of domestic violence, even though, you know, I study psychology, or I hold a good job, or I am successful. You know, there is so much shame, and I think people, there is still so much suppression of our own personal situation, emotions and feelings, because we're worried about what other people would think. And then we stay in those situations to the detriment of our own health, our health of our children. And
I'd like to say that all of these subjects that have affected my life are taboo subjects. Our society does not welcome in discussion about any of these subjects. They are all taboos, and it is my intention, my open intention, to target those stigmas. Because when we taboo a subject, we push people into the shadows, and that's where they start to gather the shame.
Yeah.
we shame them by silencing them. So thank you very
Yeah.
much for having open discussion about these really important subjects.
Yeah. And I think we kind of talked about a little bit before we came live that, we have this perception that people that are in a domestic violence relationship, they come from a family who were in a domestic violence relationship, and that is not necessarily the case. What was your experience around that?
I'd had none.
Yes, exactly.
My parents are very respectable people. They love me.
Wow.
They were professional people. And I had 3 sisters. My dad was a minister. He was an ordained Methodist minister, and he's a very loving person. There was absolutely no violence in my household.
Yeah.
It was, it was very foreign to me to be experiencing it.
Yeah.
And I used to watch my sisters at family gatherings and just watch the dynamic between them and their husbands. And I used to notice how relaxed they were and how at ease to be themselves.
Yeah.
And that's the part, we need environments that allow us to be ourselves and to grow.
Exactly. Yes, for sure. Yeah, that's really interesting that, like I said, we pigeonhole people thinking, they went through that because they saw that at home. And it's not always the case. Each person is going through their own journey, their own experience. And I think what is beautiful about your story is you have gone through so much, but after each episode and life-changing event, you have move forward and come out of it, like I said, and they were just all on top of each other. It's not like you had even time to recover from one thing, and go into another. Things kept happening, and you just kept bouncing back from it.
I wouldn't say parents. So we can go on to the next subject, single parenting.
Yeah.
The single parenting chapter in my book, still standing. I'm proud.
Yes.
My book is my happy chapter. In amongst all that, single parenting was a good place for me because we were away from the violence. We had the freedom and space to be ourselves, and it was such a relief. It was such a relief, and and my children, their grades went back up. They were very bright children, all of them. I had a child with the subsequent partner, so I've had 4 children altogether, and my youngest child still lives with me.
Yeah.
And they were all very bright. They were all, academically well equipped. And so when we were on our own again, their grades just shot back up again, and they felt, I can't imagine the difference for them as children to not have that tension in the house anymore. But, socially they were happy, and academically, if that's any indication, because they could not achieve their potentials if they were not happy and contented.
Yeah.
They were all at the tip of the bullet,
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And how old were they when, you became like a full single parent then?
Well, I had a few goes at single parenting, but, in and out of the violence. But the last time was when my youngest was 2, and he is now 31.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He only got his driver's license last year too, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's good parenting or bad, but it was dedication of some kind.
Yeah.
And he became a fully qualified baker too. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's great that he drives himself to work at that hour.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely great.
Yeah. So during the single parenting, I started to notice little behaviours in my daughter that really were settling to me. When I got my degree, when I studied officially for it, anorexia was very rare.
Yeah.
But it started to pop up, surface.
Yeah.
Culturally it was being modelled, and being exposed. And so my daughter started to develop these behaviours that really worried me, deeply worried me. They really unsettled me. I couldn't speak to anybody about it because nobody could see it on the outside. They look for physical symptoms, not so much the behaviours. They didn't get to see that, but just in her talk, you know, the things that interested her, the way she talked about food, you know, the angles that she'd come at it from, calories, and just her interest. She became.
How old was she at that time?
She was 9 when I started to notice this. My mum listened to me. She started to listen to me because I kept on it. You know, I'm so worried about Ali. But, you know, it took a while for it to manifest fully. I couldn't have her seen by anybody. There was nobody I could have her seen by before it had manifested. And by the time it had manifested, she was unwell mentally with it. I had to get her to agree that she needed help. And eventually one day I was able to do that in the heat of an argument. And so she came to the psychologist. Then we were able to get her to a dietitian and a GP to monitor her body. But by the time, you know, that was not enough. The psychologist was not great either. She told my daughter at the next session when they were alone that she didn't have she didn't have anorexia. She had an eating disorder, but it wasn't anorexia. I spoke to the psychologist about that. I said, I have a lot of respect for you. You are the professional here, but I disagree. I think she has anorexia, and I think she's got a really severe case of it. And anyway, it wasn't for another 6 months that Ali was finally admitted to hospital. By the time she was the sickest admission for anorexia her team at the hospital had ever seen.
Wow. And how old was she then?
13.
Wow. So kind of from 9 to 13 was kind of this battle, not battle, but like just really kind of seeing things declining.
Subtly arising, I would say.
Yeah.
Symptoms subtly arising, subtly, you know, it was meeting a need of some kind of hers, whether it's to express something or to cover something. I don't know. But, you know, I was able to get her a fantastic psychiatrist who is he's still in my life. I still speak to him. He said that she had the most beautifully complex mind.
Yeah.
She was a duck student. She'd been to an opportunity class for very bright children. And, so it was a big battle that we had, and that was the strain on our household because there was nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, and it became a focus, would you say, as well, because you're constantly watching, or how does that work as a, you know, would she like pretend she was eating? Like, how did you, you know, notice that, you know, she was avoiding the eating? How does that, you know, manifest in day-to-day life for parents that are listening here and they are, you know, not concerned but not completely sure about it yet?
Could I read you a paragraph?
Yes, yeah, of course.
Foods, Ali's favourite topic. She'd spend hours in the kitchen cooking for us, but never eat any of it herself. Her use of the word foods irritated me. Food is a mass noun. I'm joking. It doesn't get pluralised with an S, but that wasn't it. Adding the S broadcast her fear, amplified her obsession with food, overtly relaying her need to control even the grammatical rules by which she'd use it. With genuine authority and great interest, her thinning face would announce the word foods, yet so little would pass her fragile lips.
Wow, so she would actually cook for you guys.
And that's quite common. And she would upstep her exercise. There was an incident at school, and in the bus line, there was an incident at school with some of the boys who were hassling her. And I picture her standing in the bus line in her very fragile state at age 13, needing to employ this condition to, look after her in some way. And these boys who were a couple of years older than her started hassling her and making comments, lewd comments. And I reported it to the principal.
Yeah.
But Ali, Ali started walking home, and that was 10 kilometres. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So she just, any excuse for exercise, and she would present a happy face. She would always smile and present a happy face as though everything's in control. I've noticed, I have other friends whose daughters have still suffered with this.
Yeah.
And that's what I see. I love those girls very much, but it's a very hard illness for me to look at. By the time she got to hospital, and fully blown means you need medical intervention.
Yeah.
She had a whole, I've got a whole page of symptoms that she had all over her body that were affected by this condition. Everything in her body,
Yeah, because your body starts breaking down, right? Like you can't,
everything.
Especially at that time when she's growing so much and still developing her,
everything.
Yes, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So would you ever see her eating? Like, how would she, and I'm just asking this as a cute, out of curiosity here as well. And I know that there is so many people going through that, and I have watched documentaries about it, that parents, they didn't realize until the actual child need to go to hospital. And it's like, how does that happen? Like that how do they avoid the eating at home?
She was seeing the dietitian once a week. So by the time she was hospitalised, she would go to the dietitian and he would tell her, you would need this, you would need that. You've got to have at least such and such. For example, half a cup of greens. Yeah. And I couldn't stand and watch. She didn't want us around her when she was preparing for eating. But I noticed out of the corner of my eye, I was in the room next to the kitchen, and she tore around the lettuce leaf and pushed it into the bottom half of the cup. So that's her half a cup of greens. Do you understand?
Just little things that she would do to.
Yeah, and she would cut things out of her diet, anything with fat. The first psychologist appointment I attended with her, the psychologist said, the body needs fats, but there are good fats and healthy fats. For example, avocado is a healthy fat. And I'm thinking to myself, avocado's off the list now. You use the F word, she's never going to touch that. Yeah. And I was right. She never touched avocado after that. I don't think she ever ate it again. So she used the F word, and to a mind that's hearing the world through that condition, it's no more.
No more.
Fat is my enemy, and I'm fighting a war against it.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't even make a toddler eat, right? Let alone a teenager, right? Like, let's face it, that's the thing. That's one thing that, kids are in control, and they know that pretty quickly when they are little, that you just can't make them eat.
That's right. So I didn't try, and it was, she had those 2 hospitalizations. She was in hospital for the first time for 6 months. 4.5 months of that was spent in an adolescent psych ward. And that was very hard. When I described it in the book, her psychiatrist said that there was no difference really in that description between that and a juvenile detention centre.
Oh, wow.
I had to seek permission to see her. I had to, go through lots of locked doors and press the buzzer and be seen, and I'm Ali's mum, I'm here to see Ali, every single time. And then inside, if we would go and try and sit somewhere on our own, always being watched, and around the perimeter, our big rolls of silver razor wire.
Wow.
She's 13. Great. That's 13 on a 13-year-old psyche.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah.
It's incredible. It was very
And I think in one of the documentaries that I watch, it talks about that in those wards, they learn more tools to avoid the eating than they had, they knew before. So it's kind of, it's the same as a prison, right? You go to prison for a small crime, and you come out as knowing a lot more about bigger crimes, right?
Yes,
Like
that's true. That's true. It was true they did. However, on the other side, and I've mentioned this in Still Standing, I've used some of my daughter's journal excerpts to tell her story.
Yeah.
And it's really lovely, I think, when you come to that chapter to hear her voice. It was really important to me to have my children tell their stories. As I was writing, I was really feeling how important it was to each of them that I tell their story from their angle and not as a mother. So I've got her journal excerpts in the anorexia chapter, and she talks about how when one girl came in with anorexia, and the anorexia girls were like, a band. They banded together, very close. They understood each other. There was a lot of maturity amongst those young people too, I might say. But anyway, when this girl came in, Ali said she really impressed them because she addressed it differently. She approached the whole thing differently. She really wanted to get out of there quickly. So she just didn't muck around. She ate whatever they put in front of her, whereas Ali and her other,
refused.
Yeah, they were not, I don't want to eat that, I don't want to eat that. And they were spending months recovering. But this other girl came in and she was eating everything just so she could get out. And Ali said that really had an impact on her and her friend. So, yes, they can share their naughty tricks, but they can also inspire each other to do good.
Amazing. Yeah, that's
with the different
interesting.
Approaches. It is.
Yeah. Then what happened after that, after spending all of that time in hospital?
Yeah. So she came out, and in 3 months, she took off half the weight they had put on her. She had to be refed overnight with a nasogastric tube for a long time. Yeah. And then she had to show that she could maintain her own body weight on her own without the tube. And she was able to do that, hold her own body weight for a fortnight before she was released, discharged.
Yeah.
Released from prison. And and so she was able to do that. But when she came home, she was sicker because it's a mental illness, and it had not been adequately addressed.
No. And also, with all the research that I've done around, the food and health and the impact on mental health, right? Like what's happening in our gut. For one message that's sent from the brain to the gut, 9 messages is sent from the gut to the brain, and all you're putting is the gastric, that squeezy thing, which cancer patients sometimes they have to eat that too. And I was lucky that I didn't. That 𝗕𝗓𝗔𝗡 thing is like that mash thing. It's full of God knows what. I mean, that's not real food, and I understand that they're doing the best they can, because they're needing to get as much nutrients as they can in the person. But that will affect your mental health, because that is just not real food.
Well, it's not just that. they addressed the illness physically.
Yeah.
And the physical effects. And she had some very serious physical effects. She had a pericardial effusion, which is 2 centimeters of fluid on the right side of her heart. Wow. She had all sorts of things going on in her body. All the fat from her other organs had surrendered its fat to the vital organs, the brain and the heart. Wow. But by the time she was admitted, even those two had begun to slow. She had prosody, which is a slow, slurred speech. It sounds a little bit like she's drunk. She's 13, and that's how it's sounding, because her brain has started to slow. And the heart, her heart rate was 38 beats per minute at rest. Her breathing rate was 16 breaths a minute. So, and she had fluid on the right side of her heart inside the pericardium. And her blood's, low platelet, low white, low everything. Loss of nutrients. She had lanugo, the fine downy hair that they start to grow as a warming mechanism that's found in very advanced cases.
Oh my God.
She had everything happening. She was very unwell. So it
Yeah.
was absolutely miraculous that she recovered, and I want to give her full credit. She recovered from her anorexia.
Mm-hmm.
If we're ready to move on to the next subject, Angelica,
Yeah.
she had 1 year then out of hospital with no hospitalizations. She learned to maintain her body weight at just below the minimum BMI for her age, body mass index. And then she came dux of that year of high school. And a month later, her older brother, my eldest, that I was very close with, I loved all my children dearly.
Yeah.
I still do. He took his own life. So he was 18.
Wow.
And that turned everything upside down. That turned our household upside down. I don't know where to start with that story. As far as Ali's anorexia goes, it precipitated her recovery because nothing mattered to her anymore. She loved Simon very much. She was very close to him. It's like those two had been to war together. They lived without a dad in the home, and they both, in their very, very different ways, missed the father figure. And yeah, so it was a big loss to her in her ways too. Nothing was as important. She started wagging school. She started, and she started to recover quite quickly from her anorexia. It precipitated, because the anorexia didn't matter either. Her brother was gone, nothing mattered. It was a bit ironic the way it did that, but she recovered, and, you know, she was living a more normal adolescent life after that. She was 15 when her brother died. It was hard. She started to rebel, but she probably needed to do that as well. It was hard for me. She became a completely different person, started socialising and staying out, not letting me know what was happening. And after all she'd been through, and after losing a child to suicide and all the worries, you know, it never. So,
So leading to the suicide, I mean, was there, again, any signs? That's such a, like I said, is a taboo subject. It's so hard. People, I mean, again, you know, perhaps that, you know, there is a high percentage of people that do that without giving any signs before, right? Like it just happens out of, you know, sometimes people say, I'm going to do that, and, you know, they don't do it, but it just comes out of a completely out of the blue thing. How did that happen, you know, for your son?
I think that suicides are layered, and I think there are a lot. I think it includes all our layers. So there's a personality, a temperament, a background, upbringing, feelings about life, existential feelings about life, how you're going in those few years prior, how you're going in months prior, and then there might be some final triggers. There usually will be some final triggers. For Simon, he was a very deep person. He didn't speak when he hit adolescence. He didn't speak as much, but when he did, it was really worth listening to, because he was insightful and wise, and he would take my mind places that it hadn't gone before. We would talk about everything about sex. He was a, you know, adolescent young man. But, you know, UFOs and aliens, and he got into trouble in history one day because they'd been asked to write the answer to 3 questions, and the history teacher said, Simon, would you give us your answer to question number 2? How were the pyramids built? And Simon said, from top to bottom by aliens. And the teacher said, that's not right. And Simon said, yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
The teacher says, no, yes, no, it goes backwards and forwards. And how do you know this? I read it in one of Mum's books. And the teacher said, well, just because you read it in a book doesn't mean it's true. And Simon says, that's where you get all your information from.
I love that.
So
Mom was cold. What kind of books do you have at home?
I'll show them to you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my
You've got
God.
this type of book. Watch out.
Yes. Oh,
Anyway,
wow.
yeah, Simon was very bright and funny, bit of a mischievous streak, but tender, very sensitive.
Mm.
Yeah, and that was something that I felt that I couldn't quite protect that tenderness in him. We talked about things. I know that this thought crossed his mind, but Angelica, I think it crosses most people's mind who have a human life. And I think it's important that we know that we have an out so that we can choose to stay. Because I think a feeling of powerlessness is a very hard thing to live with. And if we feel like we have a choice, that makes a difference to that feeling of powerlessness. We don't talk about it. It is a big taboo subject. It's a huge taboo subject. It has a stigma. When you mention suicide to somebody, they will probably try to be okay about it. But there are times with people that all the noise is sucked out of the air and you're just left with this awkwardness and a feeling like, well, I'm not going to keep talking about that. And this is how stigmas happen. We silence people and we relegate it to the shadow. And thank you so much for talking about it. Thank you for doing this.
No, thank you for sharing your story, because I think that so many parents are, again, like I don't have like a personal experience, but my neighbor when I lived in New Zealand, her son, who was 18 years old, committed suicide, and he hanged himself in the garage when she came home from work. She was a single mom. She was a scientist. And I think he was I didn't know him personally that well because we hadn't moved there for very long, but he would be cutting her grass. He seemed like a really fine boy and polite and all of that. And when she came back to work, because she was a scientist, she managed to get herself back into work with the support of her family. She made herself a pill and she killed herself.
Wow.
It's a very, very, very
my youngest son and I live with a higher risk of dying by suicide because it's a very hard thing to live with. I want to say for Simon, he really missed having a father in his life. He really missed it. The man that I had the relationship with after my youngest son's dad, Simon asked when he was born, could we call him Dad? Could we call him Dad? And, he was just tender-hearted, sensitive, a sensitive soul, very deep, very deep. And, I would sometimes catch him looking out. He smoked cigarettes, of course. I would sometimes catch him, having a cigarette and looking out over the property and just contemplating. He had all his life he'd wanted to own a Charger, a Valiant Charger, and he acquired this in the last few months of his life. It was his pride and joy. He loved this car. And 2.5 weeks before he died, he was on smoko from work. He worked at 𝗙𝗦𝗙𝗥 Sanctuary. He was a carpenter at 𝗙𝗦𝗙𝗥 Sanctuary. He built a boardwalk there and they've dedicated it to his memory.
Oh, wow.
He was on smoko there and driving down the road. An old lady ran into his Charger and it was very badly damaged. The policeman said he hadn't seen such damage in a suburban crash. So it was terrible. And he lost his Charger and he took that very personally on an existential level. He took it very personally. He didn't, that was a real blow to him. And I tried to help him replace the vehicle and it was hard. I didn't understand why these opportunities kept falling through for him. I kept driving him to different places to check out different vehicles and it wasn't happening. It wasn't working, or it was strange. But he eventually did replace it with a 𝗪𝗓. It was a good car. It was a 𝗪𝗓 though.
Yeah.
not the charger. And I didn't find out until about 4 months after he died that there was a young man in the neighbourhood who was kind of bullying him quite a bit, and he threatened Simon on the last day of his life. Simon had been to work, he came home, he said goodbye to me, I'm going to have dinner with a work friend. And on his way out of the suburb, this young man, Simon slowed the car down, hoping that whatever issue the young man had with him had ended. He wanted to show him the new car, and the young man lost it and was kicking the side of the car and said, I'm going to kill you, mate, I'm going to effing kill you. And Simon didn't know what the problem was. But I heard afterwards, I didn't find out for months that this had happened. And I heard afterwards, about 4 months later, I reported it to the police and they said, yes, he was known to them, that young man. So I think that was very pressing for him on the last day.
Yeah.
I think everything, comes into it in moments like that where you've been just wondering about life. And
Yes.
the anorexia was a strain.
Yes.
The police asked me when they came to tell me the news, has anybody attempted suicide or suicided that you know of in the last few months? And we had someone close by made an attempt. So these things all kind of make you a bit vulnerable to it.
Yeah. Did he ever go to a psychologist, like when he was
No.
a teenager for whatever? Okay. Yeah.
No, I offered for him to, and he said no.
No. Okay. Yeah.
Mum was the psychologist. That was enough.
Yeah. Exactly.
No,
Yeah.
He wouldn't go.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think what you said, like there is a lot of, especially nowadays, there's so many talks around, existential matters and subjects, and so openly in a way that it can get people down a rabbit hole, especially if you are extremely clever, brainy, and you want to know more and more and more and more, and and it can be quite if you think about how we lived like 50, 60, 70 years ago, life was so much more simple. And I think you just go to work, you eat, and and you just just do your own thing in the present moment, and then tomorrow you do the same. There wasn't so much traveling and so many social media presenting this perfect lives all the time. Now, and I think that especially younger people are suffering a lot more of the effects of all of this being your face. If you're not happy all the time, how do you get happy? All of those things in their face, they have to process at such a young age. I remember being a teenager. It's too much. You're trying to find your bearings in the world, and on top of that, if you put the pressure in understanding everything about the world and life and create this perfect life, it's a lot of pressure.
I think that life was a little bit harder for males back then too. We've come into a new understanding. We're developing all the time, very quickly. It's lovely to see the hands-on fathering happening now. Having said that, the domestic violence rate stays the same.
I know.
But awareness is increasing. There was not as much awareness for males for him, and he was a sensitive person and finding human life difficult.
Yeah.
He believed he'd left both my children left notes, and he said, we will see each other again.
Oh, okay. So they left a note.
Yeah, they did.
To the to the family, or
just
to separate
me and their siblings, me and his siblings.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And then what happened with your daughter?
So she picked herself up and decided to get her HSC. She was very bright. She was used to doing very well academically. And she had a go. She was pressuring herself to go for medicine because she had the intelligence to do it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Then she decided she wouldn't do that. She would repeat year 11 and do what she really felt like doing, which is fashion and design. So she was heading for a scholarship at the White House College in Sydney. She wanted to do 2 years there and 2 years in the sister college in Florence in Italy.
Yeah.
And yeah, she was very artistic. She was all-rounder. But halfway through her final year, so we are now 4 years down the track from her brother's death, there were things around the months leading up to that were making it very difficult for her. She was, you know, and I could tell you the triggers that wouldn't mean much to anybody else, but for her, she was a perfectionist, which a lot of people are. And that's a quality in anorexia too that often surfaces. And 87% of gifted and talented students are perfectionists. So, you know, she was pressuring herself with high expectations, which I understand. To get good results, she had to sit a chemistry paper, and she'd tried twice before and been unable. She was having to study for this chemistry paper, and there was something happened at the school. She got a phone call from one of her teachers. This is on her last day, and the teacher was reading her the riot act about something. She'd missed the previous Friday, and there was an assignment due that day. And she'd actually been at a funeral of her girlfriend's dad, who had taken his own life the night after Ali had stayed with them. So she was very affected by that. I would talk to her about it, and it was big for her. She handled it, you know, I could just see that it was a big thing for her.
Yeah.
I would call that a precipitating factor. Brought the subject up very close for her. And so on the last day, she was, for one reason and another, unable to get her chemistry study done. It wasn't all her fault either. And that night she was very upset, and she made the decision then. I had no idea. She made a decision. It was only a small trigger, but there was a whole backlog of stuff behind it.
Yes, exactly.
Whole backlog. That just, you know, that's how the whole picture felt to her that night.
Yeah.
Can't tell you the shock, Angelica, the next morning when the police came to tell me that I'd lost another child. It was horrific to see them coming again.
Yeah, I can't imagine that.
I told them to go away. I as soon as I saw them, I just started saying, go away, go away, go away.
No, yeah. Yeah.
So there we are.
I think what you said is so important. Like, it's not, you know, it could have been, you know, when people think like, but surely it wasn't just the chemistry thing, and why would, you know, this happen? There's so many little things that lead up to it, isn't it? All the layers that you're talking about. And even, you know, for us in normal day-to-day life, you know, something might happen and you just might lose it for whatever reason, you know, with your kids or with your dog or with your partner. And, you know, I know this comparison, it sounds, you know, of course it's not the same, but it doesn't have to be something big at, you know, just one thing, isn't it? It's just the whole thing.
Yeah. It is the whole thing.
Yeah. So I think my question is, how are you still standing? You know, and we're gonna talk about your book. You know, we talked about, you know, domestic violence. We talked about, you know, infant loss. We talked about, you know, losing your both children to suicide. And I think that, I mean, they are probably one of the worst things that somebody can go through.
Yes.
Right. And if anybody's listening to this right now and they are just thinking to themselves, I don't know if I can move forward from this.
I have stayed each time I lost a child because I was a single mum with another child to live for, and it's still like that now. I just could not leave my child, whatever child I've had left, and I still feel that way now. That does not automatically give me the coping skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in Still Standing, I list in the last chapter the conditions that I developed in the valley of grief.
Yeah.
A whole host of conditions that I was diagnosed with. And some of them are long-term. Some of them I still struggle with. Generalized anxiety, social anxiety, and complex PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
They really challenge me at times. They really do.
Yeah.
So it takes commitment. And I am still here, Angelica.
Yes,
Still
you
here.
are.
I don't know. I think I'm incredibly stubborn, and that works in my favour.
Yes.
I do think that's how our qualities work. I think that we pull them out and use them to support us. You know, and I think that this grief is a taboo subject, and we perceive it as a culture as something we want to get away from or transform our way through or bypass, preferably. You know, it's not a pleasant state. But when you're down there, you have so much insight, and I think it's very important to try to map out the anatomy of our characters, you know, and to see even what sort of archetypal energies are trying to help us or what we're trying to develop in a situation, so that we can cooperate with the process and try to help ourselves. Or just even knowing what's going on in those kind of ways can be a help. I think that, you know, there's so much I could say about it.
Yes.
I think with grief, you have short-term skills and long-term skills. And when it's really bad, and sometimes you still have a day that gets bad, you have to bring it down into the day. Yes. I was listening to one of your interviews yesterday where your interviewee mentioned just bringing it down into the day. A psychologist in New Zealand, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, she's beautiful, beautiful lady. Yeah, she was so good. Yeah.
Yeah. So you bring it down into the day. I call that a survival skill.
Yeah.
So if you have to go into survival mode, so be it. I just have to do this today. You know, do whatever's on my list. If it's too much, maybe I can do 3 things. If I can't do 3, I'll just do 1. Maybe, and for me, at the moment, I'm out in my yard. I live on 12 acres, and it's a constant battle keeping back the growth.
Yes.
So at the moment I'm out there pulling weeds, especially today because it's been raining. They come up. Oh
my gosh, yeah. Yeah.
They come up easily after the rain. So that can be very meditative.
Yes. And grounding.
Very grounding, very grounding. The earth can take it. Whatever you feel, the earth can take it.
Yeah.
Just letting that energy go, or contemplating as you're holding, you know, whatever you've got in your hands and looking at the dirt. Those sorts of things are very helpful. Being out in nature is a supportive thing. Trying to care for your body by eating well, getting enough sleep. Try to establish a routine if you can. You know, going for a walk. Journaling, expressing yourself somehow. I've written 3 million words in my journals in my lifetime.
Wow.
Just scrape the top off it. Just feels like if you need to vent, great. If you want to document a memory so that you don't lose it, a dream that you've had where your loved ones have visited you or whatever, things that might inspire you, things that are annoying you, whatever. Just get it all out. My journal is probably my best friend. It doesn't judge me. It'll accept whatever I have to say. It doesn't judge.
Yes.
And when you can't do any of those things, just try and forgive yourself and just let it go and try again tomorrow.
That's it. That's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It resonates so much with my cancer journey. When you talk about all of that, you know, I am stubborn as hell as well, and that has definitely helped me.
Yeah, good.
You know, my first motivation was definitely to do whatever I could to survive for my kids. And I remember that, and it still brings tears to my eyes to think that my only thought was, you know, if I died, I wanted my kids to have said that they saw me doing everything I could every single day to survive. And for me, that was all I thought about it until I could do it for myself, until I could change it for myself. And like you said, I've learned that was, for me, especially during cancer treatment, when you don't know if you're going to be going to the hospital or not for an emergency, your body's so fragile that all you can do some days is to focus on the day. And there is so much focus on, on the future and even the tomorrow. I became so good at focusing on the now because I went to the emergency department so many times, and it was just silly to even think that I could control the future because I couldn't. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I've learned with cancer. Just live the now because that's all we have. And truly, I live through this just, now I live my life like that, if my friends want to book something for 3 weeks time, I struggle with that because that gives me I don't know, I don't know how I'm going to feel like it, what I'm going to be, what's going to happen. I really like to be spontaneous and just to focus on the present moment because that's all we have. And I think, again, what you said is so powerful in the sense that, people are looking for this magic thing, the secretive thing to get out of grief or sickness, whatever it is. But it comes down to taking full responsibility of what you can do. And simple things, like you said, going to nature, eat a good diet, having a routine, sleep, looking after yourself.
That's the first layer, underneath where you're battling with what's happened, psychologically and psychospiritually. It involves a lot of work, and I think it's very important to first acknowledge what's happened, and that takes a lot. Our body, when we hear catastrophic news, the brain releases a very powerful chemical that within minutes is infiltrated to a molecular level, and that's shock. And that shock, it takes 6 weeks for the body to rid itself of that it perceives as a toxin. So that shock is there. It's a blessing. We're fortunate to have that. It helps buffer you through the funeral in a way. But then, it takes a lot of work, especially with these sorts of deaths. And suicide has its own set of challenges. It takes a lot to come to terms with. And I think that the best thing is learning to hold space for it. Learning to allow the grief and watch where it wants you to go, and if you can. And so often you can't, but if we just try, there is a creativity in our humanness. There is, and we use that every day. We don't know how resilient we are.
No.
We are.
Oh my gosh,
far more resilient than we think, because we're constantly fed worrying stories about our world, especially through the news, the bad news.
That's why I don't watch the news.
Me neither. I don't want that concept of my world and myself.
I know, exactly. One last question. I mean, it's probably obvious for everybody that's been watching this, but why did you write the book? What was your first kind of motivation to write the book?
It was to address the isolation, because I think the isolation is one of the hardest, most painful aspects of an experience like that. I thought of the other bereaved parents. I was attending a bereaved parent support group at the time, and I thought of the help that I was getting from having other people share their stories with me. And if I could share my story, and all those little details, like you did in one of your interviews with the lady about alcoholism, you went into a lot of detail. And I thought if I could share those details, then other people going through this will say, hey, she knows, she's been there. I can trust what she has to say. She knows these depths. And I only have trusted another person who knew those depths. That was my first reason to address that isolation, that terrible aloneness you feel when you're going through such deep pain. I wanted people to know I've been there before and other people have. We know what it's like. I went through a very deep, dark night of the soul that was incredibly painful. I still feel a twinge of it now and then, the pain of it. I wanted just to address that And then I also wanted other people who'd never experienced any of these subjects in their own lives to know that they could pull out their strengths when they needed to. Hopefully be inspired, give them hope.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to address the stigmas of suffering.
Yes, that's beautiful. And for me, I can say that, you know, even if somebody's going through cancer and they read your book or they listen to this, they think, you know, if Denny could do this, I could do this. You know, one of the things that I did during my cancer treatment was surround myself with people who had conquered their suffering journey. Cancer or no cancer, I never allowed myself to spend any time listening to people who have died of cancer or who have, you know, or gone from something and not conquer it, because, you know, stories like yours really empower you at such a deep level that you feel you could be having the worst day ever, that you feel like, you know what, if Denny did it, I can do this too. You know, I can put one foot in front of the other and I can, you know, start creating a new life again. I can change, I can overcome this, I can, you know, I can just keep moving forward. And there is no, you know, health professional out there that would be able to kind of tell you exactly, help you in the same way, because it is through lived experience that we relate to each other. You know, and you know, my oncologists, you know, they did the best they could, but they did not know what was like to go through chemotherapy. You know? They did not know, you know, and they could say, oh, you're going to feel a bit like this, a bit like that. And you're like, no, you don't understand. Like, I feel like dying every time I get this stuff, you know, like, you know, and do you know what I mean? Like, nobody can really tell you until they have gone through it. And I think this is why I am here to really open this space to having those conversations, because real people talk about real stuff. And we learn so much from each other.
Yes, that's right. We do. We pick up hope.
Yeah, exactly. So tell the listeners, where can they get your book and where they can find you?
My book is available on my website, which is dennymeek.com. And it's also available through all the good bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Booktopia, Dymocks, all the good bookstores.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Denny, for being so open with us and sharing your very, very powerful story. Thank you so much. I'll add your details on the comments so people can get in touch with you as well.
Could we please add the Lifeline number there as well?
Yes, I will.
If this has been triggering for anybody, I want them to know there's help.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for highlighting that.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much for giving, you know, space to these topics.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Thanks.